You know that quiet moment when you're trying to relax, but your mind keeps returning to the same small calculations. How much is left? What needs to be paid? Whether it will be enough? Nothing urgent is happening in front of you, and yet something in the background doesn't fully settle. It's not always visible from the outside. You can still go through your day, still talk, still smile, still function, but underneath there's a constant awareness, like part of your attention is always occupied with something unresolved. People often interpret this in simple ways. They call it overthinking, or say it's just worry. Sometimes it's framed as a lack of control or an inability to stay positive. But those explanations tend to miss something important, because for many people, this isn't just a habit of thought, it's a pattern that formed for a reason. What we're really looking at is the psychology of people who are always worried about money, and the way financial pressure over time begins to shape how a person experiences the world. Not just what they think, but how they feel, how they react, and how they see themselves. There's more going on here than people usually realize. When the brain detects uncertainty around something essential, something tied to safety or stability, it doesn't treat it as a small issue. From a psychological and neurological perspective, the brain is constantly scanning for threats related to survival. And while modern life looks different from the past, the system itself hasn't changed very much. Research around stress responses shows that when resources feel uncertain, the brain shifts into a more protective mode. Attention narrows, focus moves toward immediate concerns. Future thinking becomes harder to access. It's not a conscious decision, it's an adjustment. Over time, this creates a kind of mental environment where the mind keeps returning to the same question: am I safe enough? And when the answer feels unclear, the system stays active. This is why financial stress doesn't just stay in one area of life. It begins to influence mood, patience, energy, even relationships. Small things can feel heavier. Decisions can feel more urgent than they actually are. Rest can feel incomplete, and from the outside it may look like irritability or withdrawal or constant concern. But internally, it's often something quieter than that. It's the nervous system trying to stay prepared. For many people, this sensitivity to financial uncertainty doesn't begin in adulthood. It can trace back to earlier experiences. Growing up in environments where resources were limited, where there was unpredictability around basic needs, where money was a source of tension or silence. In those situations, the mind learns very early that stability is not guaranteed, and once that pattern is learned, it doesn't simply disappear when circumstances change. The body remembers. So even when things are relatively stable, there can still be a background sense of caution, a tendency to anticipate problems, to prepare for what might go wrong. This isn't about pessimism, it's about adaptation, a system that learned to stay alert because at some point that alertness was useful. And it's important to say this clearly: this way of thinking isn't better or worse than any other. It's not a flaw in character, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's one of many ways the human mind responds to uncertainty and pressure. Some people become more relaxed under stress, others become more attentive, more careful, more aware. Neither is more correct, they're just different patterns of adaptation. But there is a quiet trade-off that often comes with this one. When the mind is frequently focused on what could go wrong, it becomes very good at anticipating risk. It can notice small details, pick up on subtle changes, avoid potential problems before they grow. That sensitivity can be a form of intelligence, but at the same time, it can make it harder to fully experience moments of ease. Even when nothing is wrong, the system may still be searching, and that creates a kind of tension that isn't always easy to explain. It's not overwhelming, not constant panic, just a steady background signal that doesn't fully turn off. Over time, this can shape how a person relates to life itself. Opportunities may feel heavier, choices may feel riskier, rest may feel undeserved. Not because those things actually are, but because the system has learned to stay cautious. And yet within that pattern, there's also something that often goes unrecognized. The same awareness that keeps someone mentally occupied can also make them deeply thoughtful, careful with decisions, intentional with resources, able to think through consequences in a way others might overlook. There's a kind of depth in that, a form of quiet responsibility. So the experience isn't simply negative, it's layered.